So hello and welcome to everyone that's joining us from the short film programme for this piece of bonus content. My name's Roisin and I'm the Environmental Officer at Edinburgh Green Film Festival. And I'll let Connor introduce himself.
Yeah, my name's Connor. I deal with marketing and outreach and sort of operations and festival logistics and anything that comes under that barrier. And more importantly, today we have Frank Martin, who is the director of the short film Cold Stacks. I mean, Frank, if you want to give yourself a wee introduction, just for folks that maybe not know who you are, just a wee introduction.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm anyone of note. I'm Frank. I kind of shot and directed the film and edited it. I'm currently studying at the National Film and Television School down in London. I'm really excited for the festival.
Great stuff. So yeah, we'll just jump into some questions. It'll be about a 20, 25, maybe no longer than a half-hour conversation. So I suppose the first question we were kind of curious about was maybe the obvious one, is what sort of compelled you to kind of tell this story? What was the driving force behind it?
I'm worried this is not the most inspiring answer, but I think the thing that really drew me to the place in the first place was that just the imagery of these kind of stacked oil rigs in the Cromarty Firth, which are just really visually very dramatic. And I thought they were so kind of compelling that I wanted to go up and make a film about them, but I didn't really know anything about them when I went. I was actually studying to be a lawyer and was really not enjoying it at all. And so I kind of wanted an excuse to go to the Scottish Highlands. And I think I'd seen some sort of tabloid article about them, possibly in some reprehensible publication, maybe the Sun or the Daily Mail or something. So I decided to kind of go and see. And then I spoke to people while I was up there and thought it was lots of kind of interesting stories to tell about them.
Did the three kind of breakdowns of your film, was that just like an unintended sort of consequence of visiting, or did you kind of have it in your head that you wanted to make a film focusing on sort of the three issues at hand?
No, it really emerged organically and retrospectively. I went up and filmed the oil rigs, which is that second section of the film, and which is like, these are beautiful and weird, and couldn't really find a story that worked as a narrative at all. And so then, went back a few times, tried to make a film based in kind of Invergordon, which is a town on the north side of the Cromarty Firth, where a lot of people still work on the rigs are, and didn't really get anyone who wanted to say anything about them. People are quite cagey about talking about them. People who still work on them, they're worried they'll jeopardize their jobs. But then someone was like, "Oh, you should go and look at this place called the Cushion Fabrication Yard, which is on the other side of Scotland." In a really remote and kind of beautiful place. It's one of my favorite parts of the world. Next to a place called Applecross. It's the really dramatic west coast of Scotland. And met a guy there, Donnie Gillis, who's one of the two main kind of contributors to the film, who's could kind of talk for days, and in fact did talk for days. So gave me a lot of material to work with, and really, I thought he was very kind of just spoke in an interesting way, both in terms of like the cadence of the speech and the substance of what he was saying. And then so that kind of, then there seemed to be like a logical link, put that first and then return to the oil rigs. And I think I'd gone back one more time and been told to really just like go for a hike up towards Ben Withers, which is like it's meant to be very beautiful. And ended up going to that wind farm, which is also one of the weirdest, most dreamy days of my life. I got given a lift by I ended up staying. It was in the middle of winter and no one was around really. I was staying in an Airbnb by a lovely Mormon woman who's really nice. And I was kind of explaining what I was doing, a very weird conversation. And she was like, "Oh, I'll give you a lift." So she gave me a lift like 6 o'clock in the morning into like really in the middle of nowhere, and got dropped off in what was kind of like a forest. And she then just left. And then I started walking. I brought my camera with me quite whimsically. I didn't even know there was a wind farm there really before. Kind of went for a walk and saw all these like amazing, like beautiful deer and things like that, and didn't see anyone all day. Ended up walking up into this kind of fog on this mountainside where this huge wind farm was. So I guess when I was editing it, kind of fit together. Sorry, I was really rambling.
No, at all.
Great, yeah,
amazing.
Really interesting.
On you go, Roisin. Sorry.
No, not at all. You mentioned there about the workers and that they did have a lot to say. one thing that we're looking at a lot with the festival is this idea of climate justice and what that means to various different groups of people. And quite topical at the moment is this idea of a just transition from fossil fuel industries to sort of green, clean, renewable energy. And there was actually a poll that came out last year by Scottish Renewables that said that 77% of workers would be sort of positive about retraining, perhaps into the renewable industry. And even higher than that, 86% said that they would be open to retraining if the government assisted them. So I just wondered if they mentioned that at all to you when you were discussing things, if that was kind of the same sentiment up there in the Highlands?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, particularly with Donnie, who's the, as I say, the kind of main contributor to the film, the first guy who appears in it. He's very keen to. He's very like his like life philosophy is like change with the times, to a very admirable extent, and he is kind of very stoical about the change in the economic direction of the Highlands, and I mean. He's getting on to his retirement age now and has no intention of. I think he may have even retired. I haven't spoken to him in a little while, but he's works managing that quarry now. But yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't claim to have like done a census, but he was very keen to. Well, I don't know how representative he's really interested. He would often say that people were resentful of this idea that like this thing, which was an incredibly lucrative form of employment. I wouldn't say it has totally disappeared, but certainly I think the fabrication of oil rigs, so the building of them, has more or less disappeared. And he said that particularly where he was, where he knew like hundreds and hundreds of people worked in this fabrication yard in Kishen, that people were quite bitter about it, which is obviously something that comes up in film. And then the people I spoke to in Invergordon, who don't feature in the film, and the film isn't really about, who still work on the oil rigs that are out in the North Sea, don't seem to engage that much. And most people, I wouldn't. They're not. Most of them seem to believe in climate change and like fully recognize. But I think for them, it's just like a job's a job. So as you say, I don't think that they're like totally enamored by their work. It's well-paid work, which I think if you're going to say you've got to retrain to do something else and it's going to be paid a similar amount, I can't see almost any of them having an issue with it. I think the issue arises when you're like it'll be paid a lot less. So I think it's I think it really is a job's a job for them kind of thing. Yeah. Sorry, again, kind of rambling.
No, that not at all actually, because we were going to ask. That's the one things we kind of, I think within like the broader context of sort of this kind of idea is that, like in America, for example, one of the big sort of themes of the presidential election in 2016 was this idea of people having an emotional connection, regardless of what you think of the two political candidates. But if you just look at the issue of, they kind of were invested in their coal jobs, and to them, coal was coal and oil was oil, and there was kind of a, because their father did it, and then their fathers before them did it. So that's actually interesting. I probably kind of maybe felt that they would have a different opinion. So you think though? So you kind of got from it that they definitely think that climate change is a significant issue facing the bigger picture of the world. And
I wouldn't say that it's like their primary concern, but they're not like climate denialists at all. I think I do, and this is a distinction that has been articulated by a number of people, that I also had that thought to do with linking it to thinking about how it relates to like the coal miners in Britain in the 1980s, and also, as you say, the kind of Rust Belt in America and that industrial part of America that was, as you say, a kind of hot topic in the latest presidential debates. And Trump was like, "I'll maintain all these coal mines for you and I'll subsidize them." A point that has been repeatedly made is that there is not the same sentimentality about working on oil rigs and in the oil industry, which I think is, without wanting to speak too much on behalf of a group of people that I'm not a member of, I think it's quite a mercenary activity, and I do think there is a stronger sense of like identity around being a coal miner, and I don't know if I get the impression that it's not such a huge kind of aspect of cultural identity of like large parts of the north, and the kind of foundation of the Labour Party's traditional voter base are people who I kind of identify as people who have worked in specific industries, and I don't know how much that extends to the oil industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really well articulated. I think, I probably have like a sort of concept in my head that because it was kind of a well-paid job, and there would be that sort of attachment and that emotional connection. So it's interesting that actually you felt that, a job was a job for a nice paycheck, and irrespective of the industry, that would, as long as I guess it puts bread on the table, that's kind of the main priority for these people. So that's really kind of cool. And I think going forward as well, actually, that's something I think we would like to sort of almost replicate as we kind of move forward into a kind of more renewable economy, whereby people are open to moving into kind of new industry and stuff. And I think, I mean, America is obviously such a hotbed of industry and stuff, and I think that is such a polarizing thing. But maybe the Highlands will be can provide sort of a benchmark for the future. Absolutely. Rasheen, did you? Sorry.
No. Crack on, jump in.
I was going to. Yeah. So one of the questions I was curious, or one of the things I was hoping, were you aware of an environmentalist presence up in the Highlands when you were filming? Or even if you didn't witness it firsthand, has there ever been confrontations or?
One thing that was very irritating to me was that, I mean, not irritating in the sense that it's a bad thing to do, but it became a source of great frustration, was that Cromarty Firth is managed by a port authority who several years ago, and it might have happened a number of times, but several years ago, people, environmentalists kind of chained themselves to some of these oil rigs, and I was really keen to film one being moved, because I thought it would be this kind of real spectacle, and it does end up featuring the film. And I couldn't. It's impossible to find out the time. They don't move them very often. They move like a few times a year, maybe 10 times a year. And so I kept trying to find out when they'd be moved, but it's like seen as kind of like almost like a national security thing, that they don't tell you anything about any of the business going on in the oil rigs. And apparently, if you do loiter around, the police will come and kind of badger you. Someone came up to me and said, "You can't." I was just filming on like a road, trying to, and someone said the police will come and, they'll come and ask you some questions in a second if you keep filming this. But in the end, a local guy who had a friend who was working on one kind of tipped me off, and he was like, "Oh, they're moving one on this day. You should come up." And then I had to go on like a ship mapper, and you can kind of see all the ships being moved. It was really, So in that sense, yes. In the West, not really. Didn't really. There's almost no one and there's almost no one there.
Yeah.
so no. But on the East Coast, yeah, that was kind of the main thing.
Kind of like what's going down in down south right now on that the busy motorway there
on the M25.
Yeah.
Right. I think it was an Extinction Rebellion type.
Yeah, that's right. And I think I know they were causing some. Excuse me. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. That's just well timed topically, that there is also that kind of extreme level of, and I don't mean that in a bad way, extreme level of activism, so that's I think do you, when it comes to sort of this idea of like activism and stuff, what do you as someone that you have an interest in sort of the environment and being sustainable and whatnot, what do you think is sort of the correct course of action as a way that we the people can kind of get our point across? What do you think is perhaps maybe the more appropriate way to do so? Because one of the things that we're hoping to do with our festival is we have a panel discussion, all being well, that will relate to the COP26. And what we're hoping to try and do is bring sort of together an array of people that represent industry, they represent, sort of the activist community, and then obviously the politicians as well, those that legislate. So I guess, sort of two parts there. What do you think as an activist is kind of the correct way to kind of go about these things? And then part B, who do you think should be the sort of driver, if you will, of this push to a sort of a more circular economy and a more of a renewable based energy system? If that's something you've ever kind of thought about, or
I would say that I didn't make the film as an activist film, certainly at all. In fact, I'm not a big fan of activist filmmaking. The film, I suppose, does have, so it definitely has environmental themes, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like I made it because I thought it would be interesting and strange and a bit dreamlike and a kind of weird place with people who had very different experience of the world, and who spoke about them in interesting ways. And also that it reflects on something which is like obviously like a huge aspect of like contemporary society. But it's not a didactic film. It's not trying to teach people anything. I don't think. And I hope that people would take different things from, I think good films tend to have quite a variety of readings. And so you can watch it, you should be able to watch, and good art generally should engender different responses in different people. Otherwise it's kind of lacking in ambiguity. Now, there probably is like loads of merit to like activist filmmaking, but like I watched what's it called, Seaspiracy kind of thing, and maybe there's like that's really important. I'm sure he's had a huge impact on the world by doing that, and it did like motivate me because I still eat fish, and I'm now trying to cut out eating fish. And like that's really important, but it seems to me like a totally different discipline. Like it feels like
aims.
Yeah, it's almost like a long form advertisement for a worthy cause, or like a piece of campaigning. And I suppose I would say I'm like, I hope to be like a filmmaker first, and then who's trying to document I think things that are odd, and I'm kind of slightly interested in the kind of like uncanny and strange places. That are also like perhaps do bear on like the nature of the modern world. So I wouldn't claim to be like an activist filmmaker. Now I'm sure you do have some activist filmmaking in your festival, and it's like definitely it's like, that's not me denigrating. I think it's like a worthy discipline, and I do completely endorse the aims of your festival. Like but I don't know how much. I mean, it's quite interesting when I say that the film should have different responses to different people. You're obviously programming an environmentalist film festival, and you read it as an environmentalist film, but I suppose that I would hope different people might even read it in different ways. And I don't at all think your reading of it is wrong. I think it's like, that's definitely a legit way of reading it. But I mean, you can also look at it as like, I suppose if you're looking at it through, and these things are not mutually exclusive ways of looking at the world, but you can definitely look at it as a film about I suppose like a kind of ethnography of a community in a very isolated part of the world. You can look at it as a exercise in landscape photography. You could look at it as something which is concerned with labor rights, and the kind of it's definitely also a film, I think, about aging and like and perhaps like the way the world might move on in your absence. So all of these things, I think, might be different ways of looking at it and different ways of reading it. So I suppose I may not have answered your question, but maybe I've answered your question by saying that I might not be the right person to ask.
No, not at all. Because you know what, it's so funny that you kind of say that, because when me and Rasheen were kind of prepping for this discussion, we kind of looked at your film, and we were kind of, and I guess not in a bad way, but we were kind of like trying to kind of, we were probably overthinking it in the sense of, we were like, right, are we just missing something? And is the film, is it a discussion about, is it identifying a problem and here are the solutions? And it's probably not really that. It's like you said, it's a conversation about the effect of industry in general. Like it doesn't actually really probably matter if it was a renewable based economy, and that went, that the social problems would probably come with that as well. So we also felt that it had a sort of probably a plethora of meanings, and I probably took things from it that Rasheen didn't take, and vice versa. So yeah, absolutely. So no, that's kind of, we were almost kind of like nervous that we would kind of like, I personally, I don't want to speak for Rasheen, but I was like, I was reading the film in a wrong way. So it's actually nice to hear you say that it's
no, I think it's great that people read it. People definitely should read it in different ways. And I don't, again, a bit like saying I'm not that interested in activist filmmaking, I don't think you should make a film where you know exactly what people are going to take. If your aim is primarily to make a film rather than it is to teach people things, if your aim is, if that's your primary concern, like a good film is or a good piece of art, I think is something which is like, shouldn't have a specific conclusion that people kind of draw from it. Because I mean, why would you make it? Would be such a kind of circuitous and roundabout way of conveying a message. If I wanted you to think something, I'd just tell you.
Yeah, right.
So I don't know. Yeah.
100%. No, absolutely. Rasheen, did you have any?
I guess off the back of that, one thing that we've kind of looked at with a lot of our films is sort of the responsibilities maybe that media might have to bring up these kinds of issues, like the climate crisis, like the biodiversity crisis, social issues, that kind of thing, and sort of how people can do that. I mean, I know it's a bit of a tricky question because you said you're not primarily doing this to be an activist filmmaker, but maybe just to hear your views on that.
Sorry,
Sorry,
you may have just could you just clarify the question? Sorry.
So essentially, do you think that mainstream media and
has a responsibility
has a responsibility to sort of raise these issues?
Yeah, I think we're now at the point where the issue is so existentially present that surely everyone has an issue. Everyone has a kind of moral obligation to you know, it's like, you know, I guess it's I think all hands to the pump at this point. So, you know, whatever discipline you work in, you should be alarmed.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just feels like the world is ending, doesn't it? So
yeah.
I think,
and increasingly plausibly within our lifetime, which is, you know, not that's a very depressing thing to say. I mean, I really hope it doesn't.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of a crisis point now. Yeah,
I was read a very good piece in the New York Times. Do you know Losing Earth? Have you come across Losing Earth? Losing Earth was a book written fairly recently, I think, by a journalist who writes in the New York Times. The New York Times published it in full, and it's a short non-fiction book. It's about 50,000 words or something, maybe 30,000 words. But as a kind of piece of online journalism, it looks vast. Really worth a read. Very disturbing. The premise is basically that all of this was kind of known about in the 1970s and 80s, and through kind of quite aggressive lobbying and political apathy in America, it basically had nothing done over and over and over and over again. And someone talking, I don't think it was a journalist, I think it was someone discussing that text, said, I would recommend reading that. It's a good book. I mean, a very sad book to read, even though it's quite matter of fact in its tone. But someone discussing that said that there is this inclination that we have to talk about, I suppose, you either get people who deny kind of climate change entirely, increasingly few, I hope, and increasingly like evidently conspiratorial rather than a legitimate political interpretation of the world, right? But there are people who still do that. When I say increasingly conspiratorial, I think they fall in line with now the people who residually still do that are the same people who are like anti-vaxxers, you know, like nut jobs on the internet who, you know, are retweeting all sorts of stuff and sending WhatsApp messages around. But then the flip side of that is, and people who are probably like me, who say, you know, the world is ending, and the argument made on this in this discussion, the New York Times discussion, was that those are almost two sides of the same coin, in that there is both abrogate responsibility for action, because if the world is ending, that's almost as if nothing were happening, because you're saying that it's out of our hands. And the truth is that is tragically in between those two extremes, right? Which is that, and it would almost be preferable if the world were ending, and instead you'll have hundreds of millions of people suffering and dying, and mostly in the developing world, and yet the world will not end, right? And so what you will have is this, you know, it can always be worse. And so we do have this constant obligation to act at the same time as I think likely to be bearing witness to something really horrifying. Which is, you know, a kind of sad, really sad conclusion, but also something which I think should impel people to kind of live their lives in a way which is, you know, climate friendly.
Yeah, trying to incorporate it into everything.
Definitely. Yeah. I think we were kind of again thinking, you know, because a lot of the people that are going to probably come to because by nature it's probably you know, when you think of an environmental film festival, that in itself that's quite a niche. Whilst, you know, people probably know the connotations of climate change, and there's a particular probably image in their head of, you know, polar ice caps melting and you know, polar bears like struggling to survive and all that sort of thing. But we were kind of thinking, you know, do you think as a filmmaker, and maybe not just yourself, but do you think that more stories, fictitious or not, should try and incorporate more themes to try and kind of appeal to a broader, I don't want to use the word market because we're talking about sort of like industry being sort of exploitative, but in general, just to try and appeal to sort of more of a mass?
I don't know. I think that, I mean, like, yes, probably. because as I say, all hands to the pump kind of thing, and
Yeah.
film is no different. But I also am skeptical of falling into the trap of something. As I say, I was studying to be a kind of lawyer before and wanted to go into public law and criminal law, and I think that's quite like a substantive way of changing the world. Basically, I went to want to make films because I wanted to make films, and I think it's it's quite indulgent, and it's like I really enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
But I'm always wary of people who talk about film as like so important. I mean, it's important in as much as like, I think there's a Pope Francis quote about football, which I really like, where he's said, of all the unimportant things, football is the most important. And I think that might, I mean, I also love football, but I think that might also apply to film for me, which is that, but ultimately it is quite trivial. And I'm always wary of filmmakers who talking with great kind of portent about their work as if they've done something really substantive. Now, sure, like everyone should be doing everything, but I don't know if if you're like a young person who like really wants to like change the world and try and help climate change, I don't know if film is like the best, most efficient way of doing it. But then it's like how much, I don't know. That's quite a pessimistic answer. I'm just kind of sick of like hearing kind of actors talk about like, I said we have an obligation to like, act, make films about these things. It really feels like having your cake and eat it. And probably the best thing you can do is go and get maybe a degree in like environmental science or something, go and do research and stuff like that. But that's maybe that's a bit of a kind of Yoda answer. but I suppose that's my own skepticism.
I do think that is shared, especially amongst people that are sort of more engaged. I think sometimes there's a tendency to kind of sort of mask things up with sort of wonderful like platitudes, like you're saying within the arts and stuff about sort of whilst I'm sure it comes with sort of great intention. I think sometimes people in film and stuff, the Met Gala and stuff, when you're in such a sort of position of privilege, and again, it's sort of through no fault of their own because it's just the world that they're thrust into. It sort of just comes with the territory. But I think, to me, I think it's, I was kind of mentioning there about sort of the role of government and business. To me, I think that really has to sort of be the driver, because ultimately we can have all the marches we want, which are all well intentioned, and we can have all the sort of the really, really great language that comes with kind of the motivation of change and all that sort of, that's great, but I think it has to be backed up by concrete policy and
policy is I don't know. I think business, I wouldn't lump business in with that, because I think business protects its own interests, and its own interests are, if they happen to suddenly become environmental,
right,
it will is kind of extremely, business is mercurial and self-centered and chameleon-like, right? And it just does whatever it can to generate more capital. And so you have to create policy, you have to contrive legislatively, legal situations, whereby that businesses are economically motivated to be environmentally friendly. But
exactly,
I also do think that there is a slight temptation. I often hear people talk about, corporations generate all of the kind of, corporations are responsible for like 75%, 80% of the kind of greenhouse emissions. I know that statistic is pulled out of my head as a hypothetical, but like that, like
I know what you mean,
representative of the kind of rhetoric. And I think that is also a desire to abrogate one's personal responsibility. Like, corporations are iniquitous, they are sinister, they are predatory, but they also give us what we ask them to. And I think that, it's like abstract kind of oil corporations from the Persian Gulf are, they're providing things which fuel your car. It's like, so I think it's tempting to be like to render these kind of abstract kind of billionaire bogeymen, who are reprehensible, but are also have gained profit from exploiting things that we demand of them. I think it's like an uncomfortable reciprocity relationship between the kind of cell and superstructure.
Definitely, I think you're right. It's that kind of, we have to basically sort of craft a political process, and with that, once the political will is there, and ultimately, you're right. Like, business will do what's in the best interest of their shareholders for the most part. Obviously, you can make exceptions. There is sort of businesses in their own right that will kind of take on sustainable models. You know, Patagonia would be one, for example.
Yeah, I like Patagonia.
Yeah, you're right. I love paying for 150 quid for a fleece.
Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. But I suppose that comes with it. Rasheen, did you have anything else to ask, or?
No, I don't think so. Other than the sort of going back to the more generic questions, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I have probably. Is there anything else with Rasheen you felt you want to ask, or?
I mean, we kind of already touched on this one, but I'll ask again just in case there's any extra. But what do you hope that the audience will take away from the film? I suppose you've said though that you want people to take from it what they will, I guess, and however they interpret it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I hope it makes you feel something, which is obviously incredibly bland and age specific, but I also think is actually a harder thing to achieve than, even in its age specificity, than it might sound, because I think I still watch most films and read most books without really feeling anything. And I think that even whatever emotion it engenders in you, or even if it's just curiosity, then I hope, or a sense of kind of something dreamlike or unsettling or beautiful or whatever, I hope that would be the aim. I'm not sure I would even claim that. I mean, it was my first effort trying to make a film, so you'll have to bear with me if it doesn't do that. And it's also 11 and a half minutes, so I don't know if it's going to it's not a super sublime piece of filmmaking, but there's I suppose that would be the ambition.
Mm-hmm. If people want to know more, where can they find you?
Instagram, probably. Follow me on Instagram. That's the best thing I have. I should probably make a website. I think I do have a website, but it doesn't have anything on it at the moment. I just bought a domain at one point. Yeah, I'm very recently a kind of legal student, so it's all fairly new to me. But my Instagram is f.f.eli. Yeah, I post nice photographs and I'll post updates about what films I've made if anyone is curious.
Oh, definitely.
It feels very YouTuber, link in bio.
Yeah, we'll drop the link down here.
But with that, Frank, thank you so much for your time. It's so greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Connor. Thank you, Rasheen. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what becomes of the festival. I'm sure it will be here to stay. You guys have been great. All right.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thanks.
See you later, Frank. Have a good evening. Bye.